Welcome to another edition of Language of the Gods, where we discuss issues and topics relating to metaphysics, astrology, and astrotheology. Here we delve into the dark recesses of hidden knowledge in an attempt to draw out the truth which has been suppressed and distorted by a sinister hidden hand over centuries of control and manipulation, as they work together towards their ultimate objective of global governance under an all-encompassing technological control grid.
He who controls the past controls the future, and he who controls the present controls the past. George Orwell. History is a set of lies that people have agreed upon. Napoleon Bonaparte. Our past is only a little less uncertain than our future, and like the future, it is always changing, always revealing and concealing. Daniel Borstein. History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it. Winston Churchill. Which has the greater influence, the past on the present, or the present on the past? As the victors write the history books, they also massage previous known versions, selecting what suits them and deselecting what doesn't. The aim is to control the collective minds of its citizens, who passively accept what is referred to as official history. You could argue that the only certain thing about history is that it happened in the past. The rest is an official exercise in socially engineering of the public consciousness. The greater the power and influence of the control system, the greater the potential for perverting and manipulating the truth. Every empire, kingdom or dictator has, in some way, secured its power base on a glorified version of the past, aligning themselves with destiny and divinity as they promote an impressive version of history designed to subordinate their citizens, who are taught to fear and respect their new all-powerful masters. Basic orthodox view of history. Once upon a time, there was nothing. Around 13 billion years ago, energy and matter spontaneously exploded into existence. From this void of nothingness sprang the universe. This is known as the Big Bang Theory. Around 1 billion years later, stars magically appeared which lit up the universe. Our solar system, its planets, and the Earth all evolved around 4.6 billion years ago. The gravitational collapse of a giant molecular cloud collected in the center to form our Sun, along with various concentrated pockets of dense clouds which formed moons and planets. Our Moon formed relatively recently, between 30 and 50 million years after the Earth. A hypothesis known as the giant impact theory concluded that a body the size of Mars struck the Earth, ejecting a huge amount of matter into orbit. This matter later became spherical and formed what we know today as the Moon. At some point in the Earth's early beginnings, conditions arose creating the perfect environment for life to emerge. Single cellular organisms appeared around 3.8 billion years ago. 3 billion years later, the first multicellular plants appeared, probably green algae. Over time, these cells became more specialized, unique, and interdependent. This current Phanerozoic phase started approximately 540 million years ago. It is divided into three sub-eras: the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic, with the Paleozoic era being 540 million to 250 million years ago. It was a period where many modern groups of life began to evolve. The land was inhabited initially by plants, then by animals on an enormous continent known as Pangaea. This was followed by the Mesozoic era from 250 to 66 million years ago, also divided into subsections with the Triassic, Jurassic, and the Cretaceous era. Each era became disrupted by some form of global extinction event. The Cenozoic era, which we are in now, began after such an event around 66 million years ago, a global cataclysm which saw the end of the dinosaurs. The Cenozoic era also had three subdivisions: the Paleogene, Neogene, and Quaternary periods. Any life which survived up to this point diversified into the species we see today. The megacontinent of Pangaea began to break apart around 180 million years ago, separating to form new smaller continents. There have been many global extinction events which have taken place over the Earth's evolvement, some so catastrophic they put an end to upwards of 95% of all life on Earth. Around 6 million years ago, two branches split from small apes living in the Sahara regions of Africa, the offspring of which evolved into chimpanzees and the Homo sapiens we see today. Modern Homo sapiens are thought to have originated around 200,000 years ago, spreading all over the planet. By 9000 BC, they had reached the tip of South America, where they existed in small groups of hunter-gatherers. Only when language evolved to a point where communication between generations preserved knowledge did social cultures and communities develop. At this point, agricultural communities began to emerge around the Fertile Crescent within the Middle East, developing into small villages and towns. Around 8000 BC, surplus food allowed priests and governing classes to emerge, leading to the growth of culture and civilized societies. Sumer, around 4000 to 3000 BC, is thought to be one of the first civilized cultures, followed by Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China. The historian must serve two masters, the past and the present. Fritz Stern. Study the historian before you begin to study the facts. Edward Carr. Charles Darwin was born into a wealthy upper-class family in 1809 in the town of Shrewsbury, Shropshire, in England. His father, Robert Darwin, was a successful society doctor and financier. Charles is best known for his contribution towards the theory of evolution and natural selection. But there is more behind the Darwin story than we are commonly told. The theory of evolution had been established by a French naturalist by the name of Jean-Baptiste Lamarck 50 years prior to Darwin's time. Lamarck was the first valid understanding of the evolution process that was scientifically published. A more advanced understanding of the natural processes surrounding evolution was later put forward in a manuscript written by Alfred Russel Wallace, who wrote a paper entitled Natural Selection. Wallace sent his manuscript to Charles Darwin, asking for his opinion to see if it was worthy of future publication, and if so, would Darwin forward it to Sir Charles Lyell at the Royal Society. Darwin, profoundly impressed by Wallace's paper, did indeed take it to Sir Charles Lyell, but wanted to be the provider of the theory of evolution to the world himself. They pondered over Wallace's complete understanding of natural selection and evolution, wondering what course of action they should take. Both Darwin and Lyell were part of the upper-class Victorian elite. They decided to change the priority of the paper, claiming that Darwin had also written a manuscript offering his theory on the same subject. He therefore quickly wrote an abstract purporting to this. This agreement between Darwin and Lyell was known as the Delicate Arrangement. A meeting was arranged at the Linnean Society of London to present a theory of evolution presented by Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. As Wallace was an educated man from the subordinate classes, it was more favourable within the establishment to have Darwin leading the charge. The problem was that Darwin and Wallace each had a different approach when presenting their theories on natural selection. The theories were similar, but the perspectives made all the difference. Darwin's perspective on the theory of natural selection. Survival of the fittest. Every day is a constant struggle. You must compete and strive to get to the top. Otherwise you will be taken over by someone fitter than yourself and you will die. Only the select few at the top will survive. The rest are worthless, inferior specimens who deserve to become extinct. Wallace's perspective on the theory of natural selection. The world of evolution is based on the elimination of the weakest. All you need to do to survive is make sure you're not the ones on the bottom. Strive not to be the weakest. With this perspective, you do not have to unnecessarily compete with everyone else to get to the top. Just make sure you're not last, the one left behind at the bottom. Two similar theories, but two different approaches. Both can alter a person's belief system, and both can offer up and play out as a perception within reality. Wallace had a more relaxed, realistic understanding of the natural selection process, not as severe as Darwin's approach, depicting a constant battle for survival. It was necessary for the establishment at that time to promote a perverse version of the natural selection process. The Wallace approach did not favour a belief system fit for empire building and the aspirations of the elite classes running the British Empire. If a nation was to adopt the Darwinist approach as the foundations for their nation's policy, they could artificially promote competition within society, stimulating its citizens into competing with one another, which in turn would fuel the growth of their debt-based monetary system, together with a multitude of social divisions. Our history is cyclical, not lineal, as mainstream Darwinism suggests. They want us to believe that we are at the pinnacle of evolving human species, adapting to our new environment from the primeval slime which we came from. Over thousands of years, each generation more intelligent and advanced than anything that went before. This cannot be true because of the evidence of ancient advanced civilizations going back at least 12,000 years or even longer. The pyramids of Giza in Egypt, the ancient ruins of Pumapunka at Tiwanaku in Bolivia, ancient megalithic stone blocks at Baalbek in Lebanon, weighing over 1,000 tons each, foundations to old temples which modern technology couldn't produce today. Although, according to Darwin, we are at the cutting edge of civilization, surpassing anything that ever existed before. For over 100 years, the Darwinist camp have not been able to produce a missing link. No matter how hard they try, they cannot find it. This is simply because there isn't one to find. Our real history is being kept under lock and key by our controlling classes, who not only have access to ancient records, they only allow the masses to see a version of history which they see fit to dispense, a version keeping us ignorant of who we are, where we came from, and what our true potential is. Over the past few decades, the official mainstream historical view concerning the Great Pyramid and the Giza Plateau has increasingly come under fire, as more and more questions are making the old view and methods of its construction seem naive and ill-conceived. With a lineal Darwinist approach to history, no matter how much evidence is stacked up and presented, the old-school Egyptologists and lineal historians are trapped by the growing mountain of anomalies. All they can do is ignore them, brush them into the corner, labeling them as far-fetched conspiracies. They turn their attention and concentrate instead on emphasizing anything which fits into their official narrative. With a lineal historical belief, any idea of a civilization prior to the ancient dynastic Egyptians capable of advanced technological achievements cannot be entertained. It pulls the rug from under the feet of the establishment and discredits the whole lineal approach. If you detach yourself from this cemented version of history, viewing it instead as a perpetual cycle of rising and falling civilizations, moving through time and space, cycles of high and low consciousness, forever changing as our solar system moves gracefully through time and the constellations. The true history and material evidence concerning the Great Pyramid and the Giza Plateau makes more sense and gracefully falls into place when viewed through cyclical history. A group of scholars and scientists have recently made a concerted effort to uncover an array of evidence showing ancient machine tooling, marks left behind which could have only been created using some form of high technology. This is still dismissed by the mainstream. Around 12,000 years ago, it is now believed that a massive cataclysm disrupted the earth on such a scale as to render any civilization obsolete. Vast swathe of our planet that geologists call the Younger Dryas boundary field. Across this huge fingerprint spanning North America, Central America, parts of South America, most of Europe, and parts of the Middle East as well, the telltale traces of multiple impacts by a fragment of a giant comet has been found. Some of these fragments were 2 kilometers or more in diameter, and they hit the Earth like a blast from a cosmic scattergun around 12,800 years ago. Graham Hancock. An article titled "Did a Comet Hit the Earth 12,000 Years Ago?" published in the Scientific American, also points to the same time period. Roughly 12,900 years ago, massive global cooling kicked in abruptly, along with the end of the line of some 35 different mammal species, including the mammoth. The book Cataclysm, compelling evidence of a cosmic catastrophe in 9500 BC. Following this multidisciplinary scientific study, as it examines the evidence of a great global catastrophe that occurred only 11,500 years ago, crustal shifting, the tilting of Earth's axis, mass extinctions, upthrusting mountain ranges, rising and sinking landmasses, and gigantic volcanic eruptions and earthquakes all indicate that a fateful confrontation with a destructive cosmic visitor must have occurred. The abundant geological, biological, and climatological evidence from this dire event calls into question many geological theories and will awaken our memories to our true and not so distant past. Cataclysm. According to Christopher Dunn, an engineer from Manchester, England, who wrote the book The Giza Power Plant, the Great Pyramid of Giza, far from being a tomb, was a large acoustic device which used the technology of harmonic resonance. Its granite and limestone structure harmonized with the Earth's natural frequencies, converting Earth's vibrational energies into electrical energy. He shows how the chambers and passageways within the pyramid maximized and amplified its acoustic qualities. Could this be the same technology discovered by Nikola Tesla when solving the clean energy problem? Lineal Darwinian historians set a scene in which our ancestors were all primitive. Supposedly, the further back we go in history, the more primitive they were, oblivious to certain aspects of the real world, in which the evidence does not always support this concept of history. There must have been an ancient culture with a high level of knowledge about the universe, star systems and planets, and how they interacted. How can this be? Where and whom did they get the information from? The complexity of astronomy and the pure synchronicity and symmetry of astrology does not come from primitive people. It comes from intelligent, enlightened beings, and to understand this may be a clue to finding who our real ancestors really were. The answers we are looking for may still be hidden under tons of earth and sand. In a recent interview, Zahi Hawass, Egyptian's first Minister of Antiquities, said, "I believe that we've only found about 30% of Egyptian monuments, that 70% of them still lie buried underneath the ground. You never know what the sand will hide in the way of secrets." Zahi Hawass. Most people are unaware of the scale and quantity of pyramid building which our ancestors undertook. Most consider the Egyptian pyramid legacy as unique. The truth is, if you delve deep enough into the subject, you will find hundreds of these structures, different shapes and sizes, all over the planet. Egypt is not isolated in this matter. Orthodox archaeologists and bureaucrats have shied away from discussing the pyramids in China, even with pictorial evidence and various testimonies referencing their existence. The closed nature of the Chinese control system makes it difficult to access some ancient monuments for any serious scientific analysis. Near the ancient city of Xi'an lies dozens of ancient pyramids, which the authorities acknowledge do exist, labelling them as trapezoidal burial tombs dating from the Han dynasty, 200 BC to 200 AD. Recently, the Chinese authorities have begun to plant fast-growing trees over many of these structures, hoping to dress them up as natural hills. It was even more uncanny than if it were found in the wilderness, he wrote. But those pyramids were to some extent exposed to the eyes of the world, but still totally unknown in the Western world. Fred Schroeder, 1912. All over the world, skulls have been found with cranial deformations, either an attempt to elongate the skull through artificial techniques or naturally occurring as part of a rare humanoid-like species. The original purpose behind the practice of cranial deformation seems to have been lost over the course of time. However, many cultures would associate an elongated skull with high intelligence, greater attractiveness, noble origins, status, and even a closer connection to the spiritual realm of the gods. This was a common practice amongst our ancestors, from as far back as 45,000 years ago to the present day. It found its way onto every continent on the planet, suggesting some prior ancient benchmark, reflecting its way back among later cultural societies in numerous variations. Still prevalent in the 19th century, especially in some parts of France, in 1833 a study was conducted by Achille Louis Fauville, a French neurologist and psychiatrist, at a private asylum in Sienne, northern France, now Upper Normandy. He established that 50% of the 431 inmates had some form of cranial deformation, with 11% considered extreme. This was not a minor inconvenience to our ancestors. Going through the long process of deforming your baby's head, a painful, even dangerous process, took approximately 3 years. For what? What was it all for? Was it to look like the gods, the same gods who created humanity and who possibly once lived amongst us? Or was it to look like a race of beings which may have once inhabited the earth, possibly highly intelligent, giving the appearance of sophistication with a godlike elevated status? In the late 1920s, a Peruvian archaeologist named Giulio Tello began excavating and studying an ancient site on the Paracas Peninsula, 4 hours south of Lima. His work uncovered shaft tombs which contained multiple burials. Overall, Tello unearthed around 300 elongated skulls belonging to the Paracas people. The Paracas culture and society lived on this part of the Peruvian coast up until 2,000 years ago. It is suspected that they dwindled in number and migrated up into the highlands. No one knows how long these people have been around and where they initially came from, but evidence during these early excavations concluded they were a culture of fishermen and seafarers. The Paracas came way before the Inca and before the Nazca, a race of beings with elongated skulls and fiery red hair. Since these early efforts by Tello over 80 years ago, mainstream scientists and archaeologists have paid no more attention to the mystery surrounding these bizarre elongated skulls. Which could possibly be the remains of a subspecies of humans which died out many years ago. This lack of interest is a whole mystery in itself. Recently, a new breed of independent researchers has been trying to shed more light on the matter. Many of the skulls show signs of cranial deformation, but a small percentage show even distribution over the cranial elongation, which suggests they could be natural, an original genetic elongated hybrid human. The practice of elongation seems to be most prevalent in the higher classes of Parakan society. The priests or royal elites have the most severe elongations and deformations. It seems the stranger your head shape, the more elevated your position would be in that community. Another anomaly which is often mentioned is the amount of cranial plates found on these skulls. The majority of Homo sapiens have 3 cranial plates when looking at the top of their skulls, but the Parakan elongated skulls have anything from 2 to 5, a skull growth pattern very different from our own. Their eye sockets appear larger, the jaws are larger, and so is the thickness of bone material forming the skull. Some of the skulls appear to have around 20% more volume than the average human skull. The assistant director of the Paracas History Museum, Brian Forrester, has begun the process of testing the skull's DNA. A difficult process when your samples are over 2,000 years old. The early tests are by no means conclusive, but they suggest a genetic variation different from the common Homo sapiens. Although the majority of the skulls look as though artificial cranial deformation has been at work, it is still necessary to ask, why are they doing this, and who are they trying to look like? It seems as though they are trying to emulate the look of a race who they admired and looked up to, possibly an intelligent race from elsewhere. A race who could have interbred or manipulated the genetics of the indigenous population. Is this one reason why the mainstream scientific community avoid the subject? Forrester has suggested these seafaring red-haired people came from the Middle East, influencing many indigenous cultures along the way. In the Solomon Islands, in the Pacific, there is a place called Vanuatu, with a culture of people who have traditionally practiced cranial deformation. Their oral tradition tells of ancestors coming from Egypt, one of many islands between Egypt and the Paracas Peninsula. It is an interesting name for the island, Sol Omon, 3 words for the sun. the sands of Saqqara, northwest of the Djoser Pyramid, near the ancient city of Memphis, is a labyrinth of underground passageways. Connected to these passageways are numerous alcoves containing 25 huge granite boxes, weighing over 100 tons each, made from a single piece of hard granite, 4 meters long, 2 meters wide, and 3.3 meters high. Granite which came from a quarry 500 miles away. The staggering precision and craftsmanship is breathtaking, leaving any observer in awe, puzzled and perplexed. The surfaces are totally smooth, within 2/10,000ths of an inch. The sides are perfectly parallel, and each granite top weighs approximately 30 tons. A design and feat which could not be replicated today with any confidence. The boxes were rediscovered in 1850 by the French archaeologist Auguste Mariette, who had the foresight to use the writings of Strabo, a Greek geographer from around the time of Christ. This gave Mariette clues enabling him to stumble across the entrance to the labyrinth and all its underground passageways, a place which Napoleon had searched in vain during his long extended expedition in Egypt. When Mariette first entered the Serapeum, he reported the boxes to be already empty, looted in a previous age, all with their lids open. The official explanation by mainstream Egyptologists suggests the boxes to be sarcophagi, tombs for Apis bulls during the Ptolemaic period, where mummified bulls were locked away in these giant granite boxes for all time. The only problem with this explanation is the sheer size of the boxes. Mummified bulls have been recovered intact elsewhere, found in wooden tombs a fraction of the size. Bulls are usually mummified in the kneeling position and don't take up anywhere near the space we see inside these granite sarcophagi. They would only reach 1.6 meters from the ground. The only problem with this hypothesis is that no bulls were ever found in the granite boxes, not a single one. The discovery of the Serapeum altered the course of Auguste Mariette's life. He was initially commissioned by the Louvre to find Syrian and Coptic manuscripts for the leaders of various monasteries. Unfortunately for Mariette, at that time the English were going around snapping up everything before he could get his hands on them. Once his work on the Serapeum was underway, Mariette devoted the rest of his life to Egyptology, making detailed notes on the Serapeum, together with all his other findings. Unfortunately, in 1878, while Mariette was in France, the Nile experienced the greatest flood of the century, flooding the basement of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, where most of Mariette's notes and manuscripts were stored. His life's work lay under water for months. Much of it was beyond repair. The scale of the catastrophe took its toll on him, prematurely aging him, leading to his death 3 years later. As for the Serapeum, no one has come up with a credible explanation. No one knows what they are, who made them, how, or why. The only thing we can be sure of is that the dynastic Egyptians did not possess that level of technology. Let me tell you that Mariette's first reports, the detailed discovery of each sarcophagus, each grave, each new underground passage, all through several years, have completely disappeared. This again will not surprise you if you've been following my writings for a while. Everything significant on the Giza Plateau tends either to disappear or, if it can't be moved, to be closed to the public. Anton Giggle. When we analyse the whole of the Egyptian period in relation to the astrological cycle of the great year, it all begins to make sense. During the age of Taurus, the bull, 4300 to 2150 BC, the periods of the Archaic and Old Kingdoms, one of the first dynastic pharaohs prior to Nama was the pharaoh Ka, and it is no coincidence that the ancient Egyptian word bull is pronounced Ka. The first pharaoh king was a reflection of the age of Taurus and the bull. During this Taurian age, the ancient Egyptians worshipped many deities who they depicted as either a bull or a cow. There was Nut, the goddess of the sky, sometimes depicted as a cow, Hathor, another goddess of the sky, with attributes such as love, joy, and beauty, also symbolized as a cow. The cow was a sacred animal throughout those times. During the transition period from Taurus to Aries, we can see the Old Kingdom come to an end, replaced by the first intermediate period. This is reflecting the energetic vibrational change emanating from the cosmos. The new age of Aries is marked by Amenemhet I and a new epoch of pharaohs ruling the Middle Kingdom. Amen, Ammon, Amun, and Ammon were often depicted as ram deities. This is also around the time Abraham enters the scene in the Old Testament. Tutmosis I appears at the beginning of the New Kingdom, after the upheavals triggered by the Second Intermediate Period. Tutmosis is a constructed name uniting Thoth with Moses, Moses being a personification of the planet Mars, the ruler of the age of Aries. The proactive physical energy of Mars plays out in the actions of Moses as he liberates and relocates the Jews from Egyptian enslavement during the Exodus. We also see Ramesses making an appearance during the New Kingdom, in the middle of the age of Aries. At the temple of Amun-Ra in Karnak, many ram-headed sphinx can be seen lining the route, another expression of the sun in the age of Aries. Many major deities throughout this 2150-year epoch are depicted as or associated with rams. Amun, Khnum, Djet, and Osiris are all synonymous with the ram form. The pharaonic age of Egypt finally came to an end during the transition period from Aries into Pisces. The age of I Am was over. The new age of I Believe began. Pisces is represented by the two fish and ruled by Jupiter. The Romans took control, adopting a new religion called Christianity, where a pope, the closest human connection to God, was placed on the throne of Peter. With all this evidence pointing to our ancestors living their lives in tune with universal energies, its constellations, cycles of wheels within wheels, the language of the gods, modern historians, scientists, and left-brain academics still dismiss the synchronicity and profoundness of astrology and applied astronomy. Our ancient ancestors had an extremely high level of knowledge concerning astronomical science. Their understanding was enormous and exact. So where did this information originate? And who did it come from? It It appears to be common practice among warring nations and conflicting empires to loot, desecrate, and dismantle the opposition's ancient cultural heritage, allowing the victors to put forward their version of history unchallenged. Periodically, Egypt would succumb to this treatment. During the first intermediate period, following the Old Kingdom, there was a great deal of political chaos. Power was divided and temples were pillaged, vandalized and ransacked, allowing new rulers to promote a new version of history. Eventually, Egypt became united, bringing in a period known as the Middle Kingdom. Akhenaten was guilty of destroying the historical legacy left by his predecessors to promote his new monotheistic religion of Atonism, the worship of the sun disk. He removed all evidence of the old polytheistic religions widely practiced among the Egyptian people. Amun-Ra was removed from temples, making way for Aten. All the old mythological history was rewritten, creating a new reality. Prior to the Roman Catholic Church and Christianity, in the age of Pisces, our ancestors left clues to their understanding and relationship with natural cycles of the heavens using astrology. It was a holy science of light, synchronicity and universal wisdom. It was the language of the gods. Much of this knowledge is thought to have been stored in the great library of Alexandria. Thousands of ancient writings, manuscripts and scrolls, historical records going back thousands of years. Literature containing esoteric wisdom was not looked at favorably by the new Piscean controllers, who wanted a version of history which supported their power base and future aspirations. The first time the library was threatened was in a fire during the siege of Alexandria in 48 BC. At that time, Julius Caesar was forced to set fire to his own ships in a battle with Ptolemy. But the fire spread and accidentally burned part of the great library. The destruction of the library was limited, occurring in the museum built by Ptolemy. While Caesar was victorious in the final battle, Ptolemy drowned attempting to cross the Nile. The library came under attack again during the suppression of a revolt, quashed by Emperor Aurelian in the 3rd century. During this early epoch of Pisces, a new religious order had to be constructed away from the age of Aries, the Ram and Mars. A united belief system associated with the fish of Pisces and the planet Jupiter had to be constructed. In 379 AD, Theodosius I became Emperor of Rome. He issued decrees effectively making Orthodox Nicene Christianity the official state church of the Roman Empire. A new state-sponsored religion was imposed to unite the people towards this new way of thinking. In 391 AD, paganism was made illegal, laws were made against polytheism, and attacks on old Roman temples were tolerated. In his book, Byzantium, the Early Centuries, John Julius Norwich placed the destruction of the library during the anti-Arian riots, which were fomented after Theodosius's imperial decree of 391 AD. The English historian Edward Gibbon concurred that the library was destroyed, along with the Serapeum at Alexandria, by the Bishop of Alexandria, Theophilus, who ordered its destruction in 391 AD. Throughout history, many armies and warring factions have destroyed historical artifacts or taken them out of context to be displayed in foreign museums. The scattering of ancient artifacts is another aspect of divide and rule, dividing true historical perspective while painting your own interpretation onto the canvas of history. Anyone in the future wishing to analyze a particular historical period at source is handicapped due to the lack of contextual evidence. During Napoleon's conquest of Egypt, not only did he take a formidable army, he also took 167 savants, intellectuals and scholars who had the task of studying every aspect of Egyptian civilization and history. During the 3-year campaign, they assembled an enormous amount of information, drawings and surveys, finally presented in a huge 23-volume publication called Description de l'Egypte, under the orders of Napoleon. The savants, discoverers and documented research initiated interest in Egyptian history and gave rise to the birth of Egyptology. Most of the ancient artifacts collected were handed over to the British and Egyptian authorities after the capitulation of Alexandria by the French defeat in 1801. The British acquired most of the important artifacts, including the Rosetta Stone, a key to understanding and deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs. Roman historiography began after the Punic Wars. Documented evidence was necessary to commemorate this important historical event. Quintus Fabius Pictor became one of the first Roman historians given the task of creating Roman history. His initial writings were not in Latin but Greek. A concerted effort was made to oppose the anti-Roman writings of Timaeus, the Greek author and historian who had been portraying the Romans in a very negative light. Using propaganda with a pro-Roman approach, Fabius Pictor's version defended the actions of the Roman state and became the underlining characteristic for future Roman historiography. During the imperialistic times of European expansion, Portuguese, Spanish, French and British explorers were competing to plunder the world of historical treasures and artifacts. As they promoted their version of sophistication and culture, persuaded by the sword, cannon and musket, they not only enslaved some indigenous people, they also eradicated them like plagues of rats, taking their treasures and sacred artifacts with them. A wealth of ancient knowledge and historical wisdom became scattered, jigsaw pieces to a lost age of human history. Some forward-thinking explorers made notes and drawings, attempting to undertake some form of serious research into the various cultures they encountered. It is safe to assume that the version of history we are left with today would primarily have originated from the accounts of the butcherers, not the butchered. Each empire promoting its own cultural values and beliefs through its own unique portrayal of his story. Nazi archaeology. Here we see a perfect example of how a belief system within the minds of a unified society can be manufactured to promote social and political ideologies benefiting the agenda of German National Socialism and the Nazi Party. During this period, in the 1930s and 40s, a policy to promote Aryan-centric national prehistory began. The Nazi Party wanted to present Germany as the place where superior civilization started. The Ahnenerbe Ancestral Heritage Organization was set up under the control of Heinrich Himmler. Using Nazi archaeology, they set out to prove the preeminence of their German ancestors. Himmler was quoted as saying, "A nation lives happily in the present and the future so long as it is aware of its past and the greatness of its ancestors." Another Nazi organization steering cultural policy was the AMT Rosenberg, led by Alfred Rosenberg, who saw world history as a struggle between Nordic Atlantic pure-blooded Aryan people who survived the cataclysm which destroyed Atlantis and the Semites or Jewish people. In his mind, all races were inferior to the Aryans. He believed that only Germanic people brought culture to the world, whereas the Jews propagated evil. The AMT Rosenberg was dedicated to finding archaeological evidence supporting the superiority of the German race. Only artifacts and theories fitting this Nordic version of history would be used, along with propaganda, to reassure the German people of their true ancestral beginnings. Museums were set up promoting this ideology, together with help from pseudo-archaeology, support for National Socialism, and the promotion of German pride. One could argue that the mechanism used by the Nazis to promote their version of history is similar to the one used to promote Darwin's lineal version of human history, a subtle yet partially credible suggestion which finds its way into the garden of the subconscious via pockets of plausibility. During the Second World War, the Nazis were accused of looting all kinds of treasures and artifacts. They also had a program in which SS scientists were sent in search of evidence to support Aryan supremacy. Himmler believed that the Aryans were descendants of a superior race of beings who lived in the Golden Age in the time of Atlantis, a lost civilization which was destroyed thousands of years ago. He believed survivors moved to higher ground and migrated all over the planet, eventually interbreeding with indigenous populations, diluting and weakening their natural superior Aryan attributes. Determined to prove this theory, Himmler sent his SS scientists on expeditions all over the world. Competing for prestige and honor, they worked tirelessly for the Reich. They were also on the lookout for the Holy Grail, which they believed to be a cup or bowl used by Christ to consecrate the Last Supper. Believing the Holy Grail had special powers, Himmler wanted it for himself and the Third Reich. We must set race at the center of life. Everything we admire on this earth today is the creative product of a few peoples, and originally perhaps one race. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf. After the First Gulf War in 1991, many ancient artifacts were bought and sold in markets in the south of the country, eventually making their way to the west through a series of open borders. By the time the second Iraq invasion had begun, a network of sophisticated smugglers had developed, who would use the disruption caused by the war to their advantage. During the 2003 invasion, Donald Rumsfeld insisted on only sending the smallest force possible to achieve the objectives set by the US administration. This flawed strategy, known as the Rumsfeld Doctrine, ultimately caused excessive loss of life and excessive looting. The lack of troops left the gates open for thousands of years of Iraqis' artifacts to be taken by various networks, dismantling and erasing a people's history. When Rumsfeld was questioned about the 15,000 objects and artifacts looted from the National Museum in Baghdad, he remarked, "Stuff happens." Iraq, Mesopotamia, also known by the ancients as the Fertile Crescent or the cradle of civilization, is where human history goes back at least 10,000 years. It is also home to the Sumerians of nearly 6,000 years ago and the Babylonians 2,000 years later. To recklessly cause havoc and decimate the history of such an important part of the world, one can't help but cast suspicion on why this was allowed to happen. Not only did organized looters go to town on ancient artifacts, but the US military contributed with disregard and even vandalism. Archaeologists have condemned the US military for building their headquarters on top of the ancient site of Babylon, digging trenches 170 meters long and 2 meters deep, which has caused irreversible damage to our history. To this day, thousands of important ancient artifacts relating to the true history of humanity are still missing, making it more difficult to challenge any new perverted form of history for lack of tangible evidence. Perverting the course of history is not a criminal offence, but like perverting the course of justice, it should be.
I can hear you calling me. I don't think we'll break the storm. I know she can't take the waves. I know I can't take the rain. I can hear you praying for. I can hear you praying for. I can hear you praying for. And I can hear you call. Another boy, he goes overboard. I'm getting scared and I can't move. I'm losing control of my captain's ship. He's getting drunk in the hold. I can hear you praying for. I can hear you praying for. I can hear you praying for. And I can hear you call. my partner face.